I'm Tom Couser. I'm Emeritus Professor of English at Hofstra University, from which I retired about 10 years ago. And my major fields of research have been life writing throughout my career and disability studies in the second half of my career. The disability memoir boom is a kind of a subset of a larger boom. It's generally accepted that in the 90s in the US and to some extent abroad in the Anglophone world, there was an upsurge in the publication and reception of memoir to the extent that it began to rival fiction. And one feature of it that's notable is that the demographics of memoir writers shifted. Historically, it was the case that memoir or autobiography was written largely by people who had achieved success over a long career in public service or business or something, athletics. And during the memoir boom, people much younger and of greater diversity in ethnicity and race began to publish memoirs. What I began to notice in the 90s was that a great many of these memoirs are actually written by people with various illnesses and disabilities. And this was fueled in part by HIV/AIDS crisis, where narratives are published of men, mainly gay men, having and early on dying of HIV/AIDS. But women began to write about their breast cancer, and lots of other people began to write about various illnesses and disabilities, such that I coined the term somebody memoir to refer to memoirs that feature the kind of body that the memoirist has or is. Quite an astonishing number of conditions have been represented in memoir in this way. Some are obviously represented many more times than others, but there are some very rare conditions that have got represented by a small number of memoirs. And it's I think, a very significant cultural phenomenon. Historically, disability has mostly been viewed under what we call the medical paradigm, where the focus is on the individual body, what it lacks, how it doesn't function well, and medicine is addressed as the context. It's the context in which this is done, and the focus is on what medicine can or cannot do. Thanks to disability activists, beginning well before the boom, a different model was constructed, and it's known as the social model. Under the medical paradigm, the focus is on the individual body and the misfit between it and its environment, but the onus is on the body to be repaired or fixed in some way. The social paradigm looks at it in terms of the context in which that body finds itself and shifts the attention to ways in which the environment can be altered or improved. The classic model is the person in the wheelchair, and a distinction is made between impairment and disability, and it's somewhat counterintuitive, but here's how it goes. The condition which requires the person to use a wheelchair is referred to as the impairment. That's found in the body. The disability of the person is the defects in the environment which immobilize the person in the wheelchair. So the wheelchair actually gives mobility, and actually people who use wheelchairs don't like usually to be referred to as confined to wheelchairs, because it is the wheelchair which reduces their confinement. They're no longer bedridden, they can get around in their wheelchairs. The limitations on them then become the physical environment in which they find themselves. Are there stairs, ramps, elevators? The disability is in the lack of access that environment provides. Other examples would have to do with attitudinal things. People are limited not just by their physical environments, but how they are perceived. But this is where disability memoir becomes really important, because it looks at disability from the point of view usually of the person with a disability, who may be more attuned to the limits in the environment than to the limitations of his or her body. So this shift from the medical paradigm to the social paradigm is really historically very significant. And it gives us a way of examining disability memoir, because disability memoir can involve both paradigms. So people who have various conditions may well seek medical amelioration of those conditions insofar as that's possible, but they also are very interested in amending or improving their environments. And that's where disability activism comes in. This topic, as we make clear in our introduction to disability experiences, is it has such broad resonances. I mean, you can start with the very simple one that each of us has or is a body. And what disability memoir does is draw attention to the fact that we have bodies, and our bodies sometimes limit us, and our environment sometimes limit us when we have misfunctions or dysfunctions in our body. So on one level, I mean, what I've always liked about what I call the some body memoir is the fact that it addresses the very simple and very basic element of our existence, which is that we are embodied. But beyond that, I think we've shown that disability memoir has resonance in so many different disciplines. In anthropology, for example, one can take a memoir of a certain condition from one culture and the same condition in another culture, and you'll find out they'll be looked at very differently. Historically, disability memoir can track the way in which disability is understood, experienced, and perceived in different periods of time. In terms of linguistic differences, also different languages and literary cultures may offer different resources for expressing one's experience in disability. It's almost impossible to avoid metaphor or metaphorical language in talking about the body. So many of our metaphors are physical ones. You talk of the chairman, the head of the department, and so on. But many of these metaphors are also understandably quite ableist. So we talk about lame jokes, and so on. So the question is, what are the metaphorical abilities? What are the rhetorical capacities of different languages? Are they challenged in these texts, or are they not? Students of narrative in literary courses would be particularly interested in point of view. A huge question in disability memoir is who tells the story. Is it the person with the condition? Is it the survivor of someone who dies from a condition? Is it the parent of a child with a condition? Is it the child of a parent suffering from dementia? What difference does it make? Who has the right to tell the story? How does representation differ according to tell the story? What are the ethics involved in who gets to tell the story? How fair the story is? And so on. The topic is crucial to bioethics, I think, as the point I've made repeatedly, because quality of life is such an enormous question in bioethics, and research has shown, and this is really quite disturbing, that medical professionals tend to rank the estimated quality of life with people with disabilities not only lower than the people with disabilities see their quality of life as, but lower than the general population. So there's a kind of a built-in bias against disability in the medical profession, and it affects life or death decisions literally. It's a huge resource. Disability memoir is a huge resource because, as some scholars said, if you're not a person with this, if you don't know one personally and you want access to the sense that a person with disability has, the next best thing is hearing their story. And more these stories are available for inspection and evaluation and assessment.